Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael O'Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for September 4th, 2020, recorded around 2:33 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, the wide view satellite imagery here over the rest of the Atlantic Basin and partial of the Eastern Pacific, we can see a couple of things happening this afternoon. First of all, this is the remnant energy of once what was Hurricane Nana in the far southwestern Caribbean that impacted Belize and the northern coast of Honduras. Again, now this has moved its mid-level energy into the eastern Pacific Basin, where once again it is trying to establish a warm core tropical low, and this is trying to become a tropical cyclone in the eastern Pacific Basin. Now, this will pose some threats to, obviously, the Mexican coastline in terms of heavy rainfall and mudslides over the next couple of days. And you can see a general piece of energy stretching all the way from near Mexico right now in the eastern Pacific Basin all the way through the northwestern Pacific. And that is going to continue throughout the next couple of days. So expect rainfall even across portions of southeastern Texas over the next several days, as this is a large area of energy. But mainly the area that we're watching over here is in the eastern Pacific side. Now, across the rest really of the Atlantic Basin, we continue to see a couple of things that are happening right now. First of all, we continue to notice that we do have the remnant circulation here of Tropical Depression Omar. Again, a very weak, disorganized system right now. It's not really a tropical cyclone much anymore. There's also some very strange latitude energy up here that it has tried to consolidate a little bit, but it's not really doing so. And it's moving into cooler water, so this is likely not to be of anything important to any of the marine interests out there across the Atlantic Basin. Elsewhere across the Atlantic and the Caribbean, we do have two disturbances right here, these two tropical waves in the Atlantic Basin. And these two right now, while they are not marked for development, we do have to watch them. They are in a pretty warm sea surface temperature environment, and certainly they do look pretty interesting, so we'll just have to watch this. But otherwise than that, the general impacts, again, heavy rainfall, mudslides, the general kind of notion, these things will be producing some impacts, whether or not they're a tropical cyclone or just a standard tropical wave. So just something to kind of keep mindful of. But these are not developing at the moment in time. After that point, then we turn our attention out to the rest of the tropical Atlantic and especially the eastern Atlantic Basin. Right now, we have several disturbances that we're really watching here with Invest Area 92L, 91L, and soon to be 93L back here. These tropical waves are coming off, and obviously these trade winds are not very strong through here. So these are actually trying to generate into tropical cyclones out in this area. It's a pretty favorable environment this time of the year, and we seem to have green lights a go for what could be a pretty significant round of storms that do develop out here. Now, the National Hurricane Center right now is watching three disturbances in the eastern Atlantic Basin, with 91L having the least chance of development back down to a 30%, 92L up to an 80% over the next 5 days, and soon to be 93 at a 60% over the next 5 days. 92 and soon to be 93L will have the best chances to become a tropical cyclone. And again, it seems like that what's going to happen with 91L is that it's going to merge with 92L. So it seems like that 92L is going to have a merger with 91L, and that will kind of make 91L obsolete and just wrap its energy around into 92L. Now we can see here the visible satellite shot here for 92L. Again, it's disorganized this afternoon for sure, but it is developing a bit better. This is the Cabo Verde Islands. That's right out here, right here, and that's the islands. We do notice that there is maybe some attempts for some isolated hints at abandoning structures, but again, really the circulation seems to be very broad, disorganized, and probably still in the mid-levels. But showers and thunderstorms can continue to kind of fire and conglomerate around this area. So we'll have to watch this, because it is possible by Sunday night or Monday morning we will be talking about two tropical cyclones, or at least one in the Atlantic Basin. So we do have to watch this. And again, for the Cabo Verde Islands, this is going to bring some heavy rainfall and flooding concerns to those islands, obviously. But it goes without saying that At least this won't be anything significantly strong as it is approaching, or as it's kind of passing through the islands right now. So that's something to watch. Now, interestingly enough, the models today for 92L, this is the 18Z plots. Again, they're not really enthusiastic. The LGEM and IVCN models, the multi-model consensus, basically don't develop this throughout the next 5 days. But the ships model does develop this at about really days 3, 4, and 5. They do develop it into at least somewhat of a tropical depression or storm or whatever. And eventually then the ships model continues to kind of carry this up into a modest tropical storm strength. But again, right now, just given the overall favorable conditions across this area, it seems like 1 or 2 cyclones are likely to form by the end of next week, probably really by the beginning to midweek of that time. Now, the ship's intensity models here, again, really don't, make this much. Again, most of them have this really at about maybe 30, 40 knots or so. Generally, and then the LGEM doesn't even develop this beyond, days 4, 5, and 6 and beyond. But of course, right now, I think a lot of it is really because it's losing the vortex, and you can see this lost. That's because what's going to happen is the merger with 92 or with 91L, these models can't really predict it quite adequately, and thus they are kind of losing the vortex. So it's not able to generate as much. Thus, it's kind of having a little bit of a harder time actually pinpointing what's going to happen out there beyond, days, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So that's why that these models aren't being so enthusiastic at this moment in time. But what we really wanted to talk about today, and what the main focal point here is the models. We're going to be looking at specifically what's going to happen in the East Atlantic Basin and what these steering patterns might be looking like, and where these tropical cyclones are possibly going to end up being and going. So right now we're looking here at the GFS, the 850 millibar vorticity. This is the spin in the atmosphere at about 5,000 feet off the ground. And again, just for reference, your darker red colors, that's your higher cyclonic spin at the 5,000 foot level. And you can very clearly see right now, this is 91L, that's 92L, and soon to be 93, kind of just conglomerate around here. So we have 3 different tropical systems right now in the East Atlantic Basin. And we also have a very curious system out here west, or I'm sorry, yeah, this is west now of the Lesser Antilles, which is right here. So we'll have to watch this. Again, not really expecting any significant development, but you just never say never within a pretty favorable environment at the peak of season. You just never say never. So, but regardless, this is 6 hours out. So this is by 2 p.m., just about 40 minutes ago. We'll move this out here to about the next 72 hours. This is 12Z Monday morning. And again, we can see here that a couple of things are happening. First of all, we have a tropical cyclone here in the model guidance. And we also have what could be a developing tropical cyclone here in the model guidance. You can also see our players starting to play up here. We have a big ridge of high pressure right now in the North Atlantic. And we also have this big trough here, an associated area of low pressure in the Midwest and Canada regions. So as we progress this throughout the next about 120 hours, we finally get a pretty robust cyclone here, probably a hurricane on the model, at least a tropical storm. The next name will be Tropical Storm Pauletta, by the way. But you can see here that we do have what could be potential Tropical Storm Pauletta here, maybe another back here. Really just depends which one of these actually gets named first. And it seems like that it might be this far eastern wave. This is actually 92L. You can actually, if we go back here, you can actually see 92 and 91 kind of interacting with this energy being pulled that way, 92's energy being pulled that way. So you can kind of see that we do have some of that steering flow that's kind of competing in the atmosphere. And we move this out here to about 180 hours. This is by next Saturday. So this is almost about a week out in the model fields. And we have a strong cyclone here. Not really much happening with 92L. It's just kind of sitting here. And then you also notice that we do have a ridge of high pressure towards the north. But you notice how that's beginning to erode. And to show this a little bit better, we'll show the 500 millibar height anomalies. This is basically the departures from normal of your strength of the ridge at 18,400 feet in the atmosphere. So all of these darker reds here, your reds basically, this is a stronger ridge than normal. And your blues, this is a departure from normal. Your deeper troughs, this is a departure from normal area of low pressure and a departure from normal area of higher pressure. So we can see here that this is, again, 2 p.m. this afternoon. We have a fairly stout ridge across most of the Atlantic, West Atlantic and East Atlantic Basin. But we notice we have a pretty significant trough digging in from the Midwest and also off towards Canada. And we'll notice how that begins to bring some significant changes to the ridge. First of all, this strong ridge, you notice here at hour 42 from where it is now, that ridge begins to kind of tilt over further to the east, and this gets over all the way to the United Kingdom and near Ireland. So this big ridge of high pressure is kind of building in a fairly, strong jet stream pattern here at 18,400 feet in the atmosphere. Of course, this jet stream pattern is being amplified by this trough in through here. This is amplifying the gradients between the high and low pressure. So this is helping to reinforce a stronger gradient flow and a stronger wind flow and stronger jet stream. You also have what seems to be a cutoff flow right here. This is just kind of now milling around, probably a tropical upper tropospheric trough, a TUT future. And you can see how that kind of propagates off towards the west here over the next couple of days, while we simultaneously start to see this ridge build back in over kind of this horseshoe arc from the Canary Islands down through portions of Africa. Now, what this is effectively doing is it is trying to steer our storms further westward, but you notice what we also have here. We have a TUT feature, a tropical upper tropospheric trough, and this induces vertical wind shear in the atmosphere in the mid-levels. So what could be happening is these tropical cyclones, as they kind of march westward or northwestward, they end up getting kind of under this cutoff flow and under this trough, and now you start to induce some shear. So this is kind of one of the main factors is, well, do we actually get a strong cyclone to develop? Now, beyond that point, and we'll go 150 hours out, you start to see that what ends up happening here, we have this big trough over the Midwest and central United States, even the Southwest, that is kind of digging in here, and that kind of carries all the way up here into the jet stream pattern. But you see this very big and sharp trough that begins to dig down here across the Midwest and Southwest United States. Now, what actually ends up happening is you can start to see that this is kind of getting cut off. We start to see a formation of a cutoff low. This is basically what's happening is this area of troughiness and low pressure generally is getting cut off from the main source of its genesis, which was up here in the northern latitudes. This trough to the north is moving faster, and also it's helping to erode some of this ridge, but the ridge on the far western side is also building back in. The ridge on the far eastern side, or the western side here, is starting to build back in. This is effectively kind of cutting and severing the line between its original trough and now this new cutoff circulation. So you can see here that we sort of get this bowling ball effect. We still have a pretty strong trough in through here, and this could provide for some pretty cold weather, maybe even the first snows in the higher altitude for portions like Denver and surrounding vicinities. But again, this seems to be the pattern on the GFS, and we also have a very strong tropical cyclone here, probably a hurricane, but you notice you don't really see much here of 92L. This is kind of not even in the upper, basically in the upper air environment at this moment. This trough tries to build back in, but we have a very strong area of troughiness over the North Atlantic Basin. And as such, these storms now are basically in a pretty favorable environment to turn right on out to sea. Basically, you saw your alleyway. This is basically your alleyway for these storms to turn right on the way up and out to sea, maybe affecting the Azores Islands out here. So in the model guidance, we at least have something that seems to be wanting to turn closer and out into the open Atlantic Basin. And again, this is hour 132. So, you know, this is by Thursday of next week. And again, a lot can change between now and Thursday, but the bottom line is that we seem to want to have more of an out to sea pattern with these two cyclones, because you can definitely see where that alleyway is. You have a very clear alleyway and nothing to really block it and move it westward. Now, eventually by 210 hours, and then eventually at hour 240, we do have a ridge that builds back in over here towards the east of the storm, or I'm sorry, towards the west of the storms, with a big trough over the northeast Atlantic Basin, and that now carries both storms out towards the northeast and subsequently away from land. So at least in the model guidance, it seems like that these two systems, according to the GFS, is going to stay well away from land. Now, however, this is the parallel GFS. This is the newer version of the GFS forecast that is supposed to be released either later this year or early next year. And so this is the newer model run. And again, this is a 6Z run, so it's not exactly updated for the 12Z guidance. But we can see here the same general steering features. This is by 0Z tonight. So this is 8 o'clock this evening. Again, 92L is right here. The energy here associated with 91 is right there. We'll move this out in time. And again, it seems like that the parallel version of the GFS does want to develop 92L into a pretty formidable tropical cyclone. And we can actually see that it starts to become something here probably very early Monday, that these two systems become a tropical storm or hurricane. And then this is by very early 1 o'clock Wednesday morning, we have two tropical cyclones in the model field. Now, unfortunately, this stops here at hour 120, but the upper the upper air soundings, basically, and the upper air data goes all the way out to hour 240. So this is pretty good because we can kind of see the upper air features here. So once again, we start off at the analysis time. This is 1 o'clock this morning. A pretty stout area of high pressure off towards the north. So again, at least right now, we know that there's a pretty good consensus on the short-term evolution of the ridge and troughs. You also notice this big trough digging in here across Canada and the Midwest and Northeast United States. That's going to be helping to break down this ridge of high pressure even further. We carry this out in time. This is by hour 84. You notice again, this ridge is weakened significantly over the North Atlantic Basin. We have yet another ridge coming down across portions of the Midwest. And we also have some curious area down here near the Florida Keys, although it's not really a strong system, but it's something we will have to watch. But again, here is 5 days out. This is again Wednesday morning on the model, and we have a pretty strong trough, again pretty in line with what the original GFS is showing. But we also have this pretty stout ridging of high pressure off towards the north right now. This tropical upper tropospheric trough, this tut feature in through here. But you can clearly see where, again, the alleyway out to sea seems to be prevalent. However, one notable change is that at hour 50, so here we go at hour 50, you notice that we have a clear path out to sea, right? This is this storm back here, the furthest east wave right now, that seems to have a pretty good chance of going on out to sea. This northern storm seems like it would want to go out to sea, but there's some problems. You notice how, first of all, we sort of get this bowling ball trough almost to dig in. We got a very stout ridge of high pressure sitting over the Canadian Maritimes in the northern Atlantic. And this is kind of that, Canadian Maritime, that this is that ridge over troubled waters, basically, because this ridge is stronger. You have a weaker flow up here, so this storm initially gets further west in the model, and we can see that it seems like that continues to happen even throughout time, that this doesn't gain as much latitude as it does, but eventually at hour 240, we continue to see this pretty persistent ridging, but it's getting significantly degraded by all these troughs that come through at the mid and upper levels, and across the Canadian Maritimes and out here across like Newfoundland, Canada and whatnot. And we have a cutoff flow over the United States and over the southeast, basically southeast and central United States. So these two systems right here are, again, in a little bit more of a favorable position. Once again, that these would probably still turn on out to sea, but you would really want to see how this generally evolves over the next couple of weeks. The CMC model here is in pretty good agreement with the GFS, both versions of the GFS. Again, not really too much difference, but you do notice here that there is less troughiness across the United States. And as such, there is a little bit more of a persistent ridge of high pressure across the, area across the West Atlantic. So this might favor initially more of a westerly path before maybe getting kind of caught up and pulled on out to sea. Again, it's very hard to say. And for what it's worth here, this is the 12Z, this is the 12Z European model. And again, it shows much along with the same thing, but you notice that what we end up getting here, this is our 216, is we end up getting a pretty strong cyclone to develop here in the modeling. Now, we do have a path out to sea right here. This is kind of that path out to sea, but we notice that this ridge is still kind of holding on. It's kind of forcing our storms a little bit more due westernly. It's getting caught up in that ridge, and subsequently that ridge is actually diving southward, and this would be kind of pushing our storm westward. Now, eventually, this might actually be able to kind of sneak around and come up out like that if this persistent weakness in the ridge does continue. So by and large, it looks like that what we're going to be having, and you can see that cutoff flow kind of form across the North Atlantic, or really the Midwest United States. But generally speaking, we notice how the troughs here, the position of the ridge and the troughs is very different from, this is basically from about 12Z yesterday, and this is 12Z today. So this is 12Z September 3rd, which is yesterday, 12Z September 4th today, for the initialization times, and what times these models are initialized at. But you can see how 12Z yesterday, it had much more of a trough, pretty significant area of weakness out here, where today a lot further south and less of a weakness, although there is still a pretty prevalent weakness here. There's more ridging to kind of help guide the storm further off towards the east, or further off towards the west. So there is going to be a lot to watch here over the next several days. And again, not everything is set in stone, but by and large, we are going to have two systems, probably actually more than that we're going to have to really watch. Again, the main impacts right now are going to be for the Cabo Verde Islands, for, gusty winds, heavy rain, flooding, etc. But beyond that point, there remains a lot of significant uncertainty regarding what the eventual steering pattern is going to be. Could this go further west? Absolutely. Could this go and turn on harmlessly out to sea? Absolutely. There's a wide range of possibilities, and no one really knows at this point. Again, no one really knows. Okay, so it's a big question mark. No one really knows, and we're going to have a lot to watch here over the next several days or so. All right. Well, that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. I'll probably have another video discussion out later. Again, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. This is Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys some more later this evening. Stay safe, everyone. I'll talk to you guys later.